Now you go.
Hello, we're celebrating International Women's Day today. I hope all the women have gone on strike at home and not done any work to celebrate International Women's Day. The welfare warriors are going to be interviewing one of our advocates who work for the welfare warriors to fight to reunite families who've been separated by Child Protective Services. As we all know, Child Protective Services is a horrific federal, state, and county and citywide organizations that take poor children from their homes basically to make profit off of them and to control and really terrorize poor people. I'm here today with Amada Morales, and she is an advocate working in Milwaukee's children's courts in efforts to reunite families and help women fight these devastating battles when Child Protective Services swoops into your your home, or your hospital room, or your children's schools, and they take children based on accusations. They're not taking them based on proof of either abuse or neglect. Instead, they take them based on an accusation. It can be an accusation of something that 5 years ago a man hit you, or it can be an accusation that you have low IQ or you have mental illness. And one of the biggest accusations nowadays is that your partner may have hit you, not the children. And these are the illegal reasons they take the children, and they're based on accusations only. So I'm going to talk to Amada, let her tell us and tell women who are listening what exactly we can do to fight back and what she does to fight back and to reunite families. Amada, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome. So you're an advocate, and most of your clients, your
Moms and dads.
moms and dads
Grandparents.
and grandparents are poor.
Correct.
Because one of the reasons they take the children is they make sure they target poor families, because then the poor family has no money to hire a lawyer. So I'm wondering exactly what you actually do to help the families reunite, considering that this is actually a gangbang. And what I mean by gangbang is you've got the Lawyers for Children's Hospital of Wisconsin, which is a $1 billion corporation that gets 22 million to take children for CPS. They're a CPS agency. You've got all the lawyers, the judges, a couple hundred nonprofit organizations, etc. So how do you fight this gangbang?
So, to fight the gangbang, my what I'm doing by joining the parents is I'm building, you know, a team for the family to counter the gangbang. So I'm making sure that they're not alone and they have support to reverse the bullying and being outnumbered by these powerful lawyers and caseworkers and corporations and adopters. Um, in my 11 years of being an activist, almost 11 years, I have learned that we have to eliminate whatever um, accusations that other that the government uses as what they call safety concerns. So if they accuse a family of having a safety concern, legally what we need to do is eliminate those quote unquote safety concerns, which we don't always agree are safety concerns, but what we do is we cure them so that they're not used as an excuse to keep the children away and out of the home.
What kind of, could you give us a couple examples of a safety concern that you can cure in order to reunite the family?
Well, the main one is housing, right? So, what I have done is I've worked with moms and dads to try to find safe, stable housing. That's the number one reason that families are not reunified, and the agency is not finding them any stable or secure housing. So we put our minds together and we find some way to get stable housing, and it's nearly impossible, but it's you just got to do what you got to do, and we try. That's one of our efforts.
So, how have you found some stable housing in the community, but from getting some community help?
Well, unfortunately, there is very little affordable housing in our city, so our moms have been um, left. They have to resort to moving out of town to smaller communities where there is openings for low income housing. And I've driven moms, had other uh, fellow workers and volunteers drive moms out to these communities, and they apply for housing in these other communities.
What about short term? Are you finding any help for short term housing while they're actually in the process of fighting CPS?
Yes, and that should be the number one thing I brought up is in our community in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We've been able to find a community, a great community of what we call Catholic workers, and they have devoted first one duplex for families who are in need of housing because their children were removed by the government, and now they have Casa Maria of Milwaukee has uh, allocated a second house to place families for reunification.
What a great model. Let's hope that the Catholic workers all over the United States hear this and help out the families because there's so many needs for poor families. Of course, women lose their jobs, they lose their security, they lose their homes, and the children are just in all kinds of awful situations with strangers, always with strangers not understanding why they took them away from their mom. What about Children's Hospital? What is their connection here in Milwaukee and Wisconsin? Children's Hospital now calls themselves Children's Wisconsin, but they're a multi-billion-dollar hospital. What else are they doing? How are they involved in taking the children?
Well, unfortunately, Children's of Wisconsin has the uh, you know biggest pediatric medical uh, resource in the city and in the state of Wisconsin. And unfortunately, they have also acquired a $20 million child welfare contract where they manage the foster care program and adoption. Um, they also offer an HMO through the Medicaid program. And so they are um, what we call double dipping, and
Uh-huh,
sometimes
uh-huh.
triple and quadruple dipping on the poor. And so it's very problematic to take your kid to the emergency room because they bumped their head. And what we've seen is that even if parents take their kids to outside networks, they will kind of um, require that the parent also visit Children's Hospital because they specialize in pediatrics. And the danger there is that the Children's Hospital has what they call a CAC clinic, a child advocacy clinic, that has these doctors, these brand new specialty of doctors that specialize in child abuse. And so now, if your kid has a bump on the head, it turns into a child abuse case. And the same hospital that should be servicing you typically for pediatric care can also now get you caught up in this CPS case that takes uh, years. Sometimes it could take a lifetime to recover from. So it's very problematic at the very least.
So Children's Hospital, as you say, is double dipping. They can get your kids at the emergency room. They can get your kids, but they also are the official Child Protective Service Agency in Milwaukee, one of the two largest, right?
Correct.
And so they can, is it true, they can come into your hospital bed 8 hours after you give birth, and if they want, they can take your child from you.
Yes.
And then the next step, they meet them in court. They have 500 caseworkers, correct, who are funded by 22 million a year from the state of Wisconsin to run a child protective service agency. So that's the second level of dipping besides their own personal businesses. And then once they can actually choose any baby they want. And where do they put those babies when they take them from your hospital bed?
So they place, good question, they place the babies with very eager adopters who are usually suburban, middle class, and very eager to have a baby. You know how it is when people want to adopt children and they can't have their own, or, whatever the case. And what they do is they subsidize adoptions. And they place children at 2, 3 days old, where these adopters form a very strong bond with the children and have a hard time letting go. So they build this clientele of adopters by advertising and marketing at so many different avenues, and it really becomes another problem. So if you want to look at it as a fourth way of double dipping, because this is another industry that they specialize in, which is a conflict.
And
How can you reunify families and make your adopters happy at the same time? Who are you going to choose? Whose side are you going to choose at the end of the day? And what happens is a lot of people don't understand this, but the adopters sometimes get very out of control, and then Children's Hospital cannot reverse the damage that they've caused because the adopters have gained so much power, and by the help of Children's Hospital and their legislation.
Right, and so the legislators every year are passing more and more bills to make adoption easier, faster, and in fact, the adopters pay nothing, and they get paid instead. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
And since the Clinton administration passed the Safe Adoption and Family Act, the adopters actually, even though they're usually wealthy white suburban people, they actually get a check for all the 18 years that they raised that child as their own adopted child once they win the child. Isn't that correct?
Correct. So
prior to winning, they just get a foster care check. So they're still being paid from the day the baby's born.
And this is money that the government and the legislation refuses to put inside of the homes of poor families to eliminate safety concerns, but they're more than happy to give a subsidy, to give payments to privileged families to raise, non-biological inner city kids and bring them into their homes,
which really hurts. How does that affect
it's very prejudiced.
The black and brown children are especially targeted, and they're being so harmed by being put into distant white suburban communities where they're the only little dark person in the community, the only brown or black person in that family, usually in their school, in their church.
They lose their identity, they lose their black community, and it's really, they lose their whole family, their extended cousins, their grandmas, their aunts, their uncles, and
and their culture. They lose their entire culture.
Yeah, and it's already a struggle, and to be placed in a different community is not healthy. The other thing that happens is that it's racist, because what you're saying is it's okay to pay these privileged folks, but it's not okay to help these poor brown or white families stay together.
And right, no money is ever allocated for the families themselves. $0. Nothing for housing, nothing for transportation, nothing for anything, right? All the money goes to the wealthy who don't need it. In fact, it just occurred to me recently, we've never had any type of guaranteed income in the United States for anyone, like Europe has for all the children. But now we do. Since the Clinton administration, now these wealthy adopters receive a guaranteed monthly income for all the years of their child's life. And these are the people who don't need a guaranteed income. But think of the irony. We can't get any guaranteed money for any of our children, poor, middle, or rich, except the suburban adopters who steal the children. Are the adopters allowed to be into the courtroom even though
Yes.
they're not yet the parent?
Yes.
Are they allowed to bring a lawyer in that courtroom with them?
They are.
And so you see the gangbang gets larger and larger and larger because now even the adopters are somehow legally allowed in a courtroom, which otherwise it's a confidential proceeding where none of us can go in there because we aren't the parent. Yet the non-parent who's only going to be an adopter someday, they're being allowed into this courtroom. So if you follow the money, it gets to be very clear why this institution of child protective services even exists and who else is benefiting off this. What about the district attorneys, the guardian ad litems? What about St. A's? What about therapists? What about visitation supervisors? Tell us about how these people are all making money off of poor children, their mothers, their fathers, and their communities.
Well, this whole foster care program was not as big as it is until Bill Clinton and his administration, uh, they deformed the welfare and they made welfare the TANF program. Um, Before, when it was AFDC, there was payments going straight to the families. In this case, they put all these obstacles to getting any cash assistance, where you have to go welfare to work program. That program, it costs way more money to run that than it did to run AFDC. And what happens now is you can use TANF for block grants. So now you can use welfare money to pay workers, the case workers. You can use this TANF grant to pay the adopters and the foster parents. And you can pay just about anyone except the families. And it's very despicable. So there's a lot of money floating around. So let me tell you some of the numbers. So it costs, well, the private foster care agency like Children's Hospital and St. A's, those are the two agencies who are paid to run the foster care programs privately. They're privately paid. Well, I shouldn't say that, but they're paid as you know, an agency to run the program outside of the government, right? And they oversee, they're contracted. They receive more than 1,200 per child every month. Okay, so we had a mom with 7 children, or 9 children rather, and just think about how many times they're paid to keep those children out of the home. It's an advantage for them as a company to keep their children out of home so that the workers are contributing to their pool of money. One worker is assigned to a mom with 9 kids. That's $250,000 in a very quick amount of time.
And tell us why they took away those 9 children from that mother.
In this case that I'm referring to, it was absolutely only due to poverty. And they did not say, hey, let's give you a voucher for a rent stipend. Let's give you free rent for a couple months. Pay your security deposit. None of that. They removed their kids. There was no domestic violence. There was no drug or alcohol. There was no mental health involved in that case. It was purely due to homelessness, which is supposed to be counter the law, illegal. You're not supposed to remove children due to poverty. So in that case, we saw uh, egregious abuse of the law. And when they took those kids and separate them, they caused so many problems in the children's lives, and it takes them so long to help the family get on their feet. And in this case, they never helped the family get on their feet. Outside agencies like Casa Maria did.
Right. So the money is going not only, of course, to Children's Hospital, St. A's, lawyers, therapists. The money is going to all the conditions all the agencies that provide mandatory conditions. Unfortunately, once a mother agrees that the court has just jurisdiction, they make the mothers go to parenting classes and anger passes and therapy, and even some new new conditions that are making more money, this time for the battered women owners. They decided that they would create one new mandatory condition for mothers now that so many moms lose their children because their partner has been violent to them. So the criminal partner isn't punished, but the children and mother are. One of the conditions they're forcing those mothers to go to are domestic violence classes for 6 months, 2 hours a week, and if they miss one, they have to start over. Isn't that right? They have to start over even if they're late. So they won't see their children home until they meet all these ridiculous conditions. It's not the fathers who beat the mother who are being put through these conditions, but again, greedy money making. All this money is filtering down to so many. We have already listed 180 subcontractors in Milwaukee alone who are all making money off the Child Protective Service system because of all the mandatory
Not as
conditions.
many kids were taken until this was turned into a business for many different private contractors. And that's a good way to bring up how I got involved. I was working for a private contractor who provided visitation services to the family, and right away I started to pick up, hey, something's not right here. And I learned that the government was paying out $60 per hour, um, per child on every visit, and that was a lot of money. The private agencies, I hear, get $40, so the government keeps a $20 cut, and then the money just gets spread out.
And this is a whole new, this job that you had is now a new job. So
since the Clinton administration, it's a new way to for these contractors, private contractors, to make money on the backs of poor families.
And what it is they are required to supervise every single child who's ever been taken from their mother. That child and their mother have to be supervised all the time, no matter what the reason was.
I could go into the horrors of how there's $60 to provide these phony visits, right? That go on and on and on forever, for years.
Right.
But there's not a quarter available to buy the family graham crackers or milk. That is absolutely not available to the families. Food or any facilities that, like napkins or plates. In some agencies, they may do these things, but generally speaking, they feel like the parents should provide their own food, and it's their problem. But everyone's making money off of.
They're making millions of dollars by doing supervised visitation now, and it's slowing down the reunification because nothing like that ever existed 20 years ago. Now, through privatization, every middle class person in the country can have a job now by being a visitation supervisor. There's not every agency, there's no requirements, nothing required, and no skills. Anyone, and then since they make
it was really good, easy money for me when I was a visitation worker. I just had to, pick up the kids, bring them to their visit, and the moms would go above and beyond. I had to do absolutely no work and sit there. So I was making $20 an hour, and it was really easy money, So it's really a shame.
And it's a new career. That's one of the things about Child Protective Services. Every few years, there's another new career because think of how good it is for all those middle class people with their college degrees.
The judge orders it, and it goes on and on. It's money galore.
Right.
It's very lucrative, and it's very sad.
It's heartbreaking for the children. So tell me,
it is, because the kids, they force the kids to stay in a visitation room. The kids want to go home to their parents' home and their home and have home cooked meals. Is really, I couldn't even describe how despicable it is.
The suffering of the children is beyond belief. The mothers, of course, the fathers, the grandparents, all these family members, if they're poor, they're being denied placement even of the children. So the suffering is incredible. We have to, get put in.
It's worse than a jail visit.
It really is awful. So I want to ask you one last question before we go here. How do you think that all these corporate greedy, both the caseworkers, both the children's hospital owners, by the way, who also run an adoption agency themselves, how do all these many, many layers of lawyers and judges and district attorneys and caseworkers and uh, condition people, the people who provide the conditions and the supervisors, is how do they sleep at night? How do they justify this incredible violence against poor families, this war, open and blatant war on the poor?
Well, the prejudice and the greed. So they're ignorant and they think that, you know, it's acceptable apparently in their world to treat any group of people this way. And they're taking advantage uh of the poor. They should be ashamed of themselves. They wake up and they have no shame. There's a handful of workers and managers who end up leaving the job because they they know better and they feel sorry. But I believe the ones that stay, they're the worst. And they end up, I don't know. I don't know how they sleep at night. They probably lose a lot of sleep. I like to think that there's some retribution that they'll pay one day. But in the meantime, we have to fight, and we wonder that often, how do they sleep at night?
Thank you so much for talking to us here today. I also want to just say before we leave you that anytime CPS does come into your home or children's hospital and they take your child under any circumstances, you have to refuse to accept conditions. You have to refuse to agree to jurisdiction of the judge and instead say, prove. I want you to prove that I ever abused or neglected my children. I want a trial and I want you to prove it because accusations aren't enough. Just accusing a person of abuse or neglect should not ever be any allowed under any law, and it isn't if you absolutely refuse to accept jurisdiction and insist over and over. If it takes you a year of saying over and over, I want a trial, I'm innocent, I want a trial, you have to prove I'm guilty of something. And that's one of the things you can do at the initial beginning of this nightmare, but it is one thing that can help you and make a difference. So how should people reach us if they want to get help?
So you should call the Welfare Warriors office at 414-342-6662. That's 414-342-6662.
Thank you.